All right, perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Burgess, and I am with the Career Services Office. I am the Senior Event and Marketing Coordinator. And we are here today to talk a little bit about salary negotiation and what that looks like. We have a wonderful team of panelists who are joining us today, and I'll introduce them shortly. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. As everyone is joining, please mute yourselves. We will have a Q&A for the students at the end of the session, and we're going to use the chat feature for that. So as we're going through, if you have any specific questions, feel free to drop it into the chat, and we will try our best to get to all the questions that we have. We have a land acknowledgement that I'm going to read very fast, and then I will introduce our panelists and we'll get started, okay? We have a stop time of 6 o'clock, so I want to honor everyone's time and respect everybody's time. So we'll go ahead and get started. Loyola University Chicago community acknowledges its location on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires and a place of trade with other tribes, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, the Sauk, the, want to make sure I say this right, the Menominee, and the Meskwaki. I think that's right. I hope it's right. We recognize that descendants of these and other North American tribes continue to live and work on this land with us. We recognize the tragic legacy of colonization, genocide, and oppression that still impacts Native American lives today. As a Jesuit university, we affirm our commitment to issues of social responsibility and justice. We further recognize our responsibility to understand, teach, and respect the past and present realities of local Native Americans and their continued connection to this land. Please remember that we are hosting our very first virtual DEI fair on Wednesday, February 23rd from 3 to 6 p.m. It's going to be a virtual fair and students can register on Handshake. We have about 25 companies currently registered and we have a really great lineup. So if you haven't checked it out or haven't registered, please do that. Okay. So now I'm going to, sorry, I'm still admitting people as I'm talking. I'm going to introduce our panelists and we will kick off our session. We have Jason Pica. Did I pronounce that right, Jason?
Pica.
Pica. Sorry, Jason Pica. I'm sorry?
No problem, was all I was saying.
Okay, Jason is a senior associate attorney at Family Chicago and Immigration Services, and he's also a staff attorney at Chicago Advocate Legal. We have Gloria Micah, who is a healthcare planning and research assistant at Walgreens. And then we have Quortne Hutchings, who is an assistant professor at Northern Illinois University. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here with us today, myself and the students. And I look forward to hearing what everybody has to say. So the first thing I would like to ask each of the panelists, and we can answer in any particular order, is how do you think cultural identity has impacted your approach and experience with salary negotiation?
Experience and approach?
Yes. Your approach to negotiating your salary, your experience with the overall process of negotiating salary.
Sure, I can start with that. Oh.
Jason, you want to go?
Sure, yeah, I can go. Sorry about that. So I think in my field of law, particularly divorce law, is that there is a push to diversify divorce lawyers. So in everybody's opinion, right, there are a lot of attorneys out there. In my opinion, there is not, because there's not enough attorneys until every litigant has one, in my opinion. But anyway, when you look at the number of attorneys, I think I just read this 4.8 5% are African American, and a smaller portion of them are African American women. So the areas of law right now, if you go into larger areas of law, like corporate law, things of that nature, there's a big push right now to have people of color. But in a divorce law, I can count on two hands in Chicago how many other Black divorce lawyers that I know or have been up against. There's not many. And as another example, the three largest divorce offices in the nation are here in Chicago. Out of those three, each of those offices have about 50 lawyers. At each of them, there are 2 African Americans. So in my world, it is slim to none. People remember me, one, because I am African American, and also because I'm a younger. So when it comes to salary negotiations, for me as an African American in a world where there's literally me and about 10 or 20 others in all of Chicago, you push it, or at least I did. I pushed it hard. During all of my interviews, I told everyone, and obviously they could visually see it, right? They could make their own presumptions and whatnot. But I told them straight up in all of the interviews, I am African American. I wanted to make sure that that was there. I know law offices that lose money because they do not have attorneys there that look like the clients that want to hire those law offices, right? So I just make that apparent. And obviously going off that leads me to my last point, and it's that, because I can bring in clients just by how I look, and your other lawyers here can't, then I'm bringing the office in more money anyway to begin with. Therefore, I should be paid more.
Thank you, Jason. Gloria, how about you?
That's hard to follow. You did a great job. But as a first-generation student, neither of my parents had corporate jobs, nobody in my family. So when I went into internships and my roles, I felt like, aside from a few friends, I didn't have much kind of like background support within, like, do this, take this step, say this word. So I did a lot of Googling. And when I interned at Walgreens for my 2 summers, there was a set salary. That was what the interns were awarded for their 10-week program, and you couldn't negotiate that. I actually had tried. I said, is there a possibility? Because, and I tried to explain that, as a student in Chicago and being near corporate office, being near my family, I was trying to balance many things. But it was told me from the beginning, there's a set balance for interns. So obviously, I figured it was my first stepping stone and it was my entry into the corporate world. I said, okay. I went with that, and I just learned from all of our internship. We had programs, we had networking events, we had salary negotiation events. From there, I said, I might be getting what I think is a fair amount, which I think was, but I had so many prospective opportunities to build my portfolio and build my knowledge that I was okay with it. And then from there, I started to understand kind of like tactics and what salaries are for what positions, what salaries start off for what kind of departments. So I was in IT. IT is much different than the business sector. So I just tried to kind of observe and really get into honing into like what my skills are and where I could help out, and where I could learn from. So I just really tried to use more of the resources from Walgreens during my internship rather than focus on that compensation, because in the end, that's where it really helped me. So I eventually went into, before I got my analyst role, I went into consulting for my team while I was still a part-time student, or I was a full-time student, part-time worker. And I knew that by doing consulting rather than a part-time, kind of like, they didn't really offer part-time, so without doing anything, I was making more as a consultant. And keeping myself in that realm, just keeping myself as an employee With that foot in the door, I knew I was setting myself up for a better track to get that job right after graduation. So I didn't get to negotiate my consulting salary, but the moment I graduated and started applying for actual roles was when I started to grab my whole portfolio and all those networking and resources that we worked on, and I knew what the base salary was. I knew that as a former intern, I already had more knowledge of the company. I needed less training. I had already more software and programs under my belt, so I was able to argue that you're going to use less time on training me. You don't have to go through the whole HR protocol. And I just knew what was under my belt versus what my competition didn't have. So I was able to negotiate for my current role. That did happen though when you apply to, at least to Walgreens. I'm not sure how other companies have it. In the application, you say your expected salary. And then when you have your interviews, you get to kind of tell them this is the minimum I will accept. And then even after that, once you do get an offer, you're still able to kind of counter it. And usually HR does have some flexibility within that. One of my consulting roles, I was actually helping hire in. So I kind of had some insights into the way that HR puts out that flat rate. And then depending on some experiences, managers are able to increase that salary. So definitely, I tried to cherish what I had and the opportunities I had over what I was getting reimbursed for, in order to then later down the path actually put that into my portfolio and gain from that, if that makes sense. Kind of complicated. It was a long 3-year stretch over that.
Well, it does make a lot of sense. Thank you so much for that answer. Quortne, how about you?
Yeah, so I think in terms of salary, things look a little bit differently for me. I think being in the context of being a faculty member in a higher education student affairs department. So what I'm going to share is really situated and contextualized with an academic discipline of education. So if there are folks here in the space that are pursuing to want to be a professor and doing other different academic disciplines, what I'm going to share is going to look a little bit differently from maybe in the STEM fields, might be in the social sciences around maybe psychology or sociology and all of those spaces. So just want to give that context before I share. So for me, similar to some of my other panelists, colleagues, I'm also a first generation student. So I had no clue what was going to be expected in terms of salary, in terms of what my package was going to look like as a faculty member. All I knew was that I was hoping I was going to make more money than what I did as being a broke graduate student. So, once I received my offer, the department chair contacted me and said, this is a certain number that they provided for me. What I was always told from my mentors was that you always ask and push for, you just always ask for salary negotiation, even if there's a salary number that they give you. Because sometimes they either put you in a smaller bracket or they put you in a larger bracket. There's no harm in not asking, because all they can do is just say no. And so that was one of the things that I felt like was super important. And so one of the things that I did ask in terms of my salary was like, this is the number you provided for me. I'm going to ask for about $2,000, $2,500 to $5,000 more. Some of my other colleagues and other faculty departments have asked for almost upwards to $10,000 more than what their offer is, just to give them some type of base. In some ways, some people think that as a faculty member, the only thing you have to negotiate is salary, which is actually not true. You can also negotiate. What I did was a teaching load. So as a faculty member, you have a certain amount of classes that you teach every semester, every quarter. And so I was able to say, okay, this is what you all offered me. Is there a way for me to have a reduction in my teaching load? Because I'm a new professor and I'm also getting acclimated to the campus. You can also negotiate things such as travel and relocation costs. That is also something that is also super important to do, particularly for faculty members who if you might be moving to a different part of the state or a different part of the country that you're relocating to. Also, professional development was something that you can also negotiate, particularly around how much money you receive to go to conferences, money that you also will receive to not only present at conferences, but also to, in terms of startup funds, to do research. And so I was able to, I was also able to kind of negotiate those things too. And you can also negotiate your start date. That is something that tends to not happen. Some people feel as though once they get a job that they're supposed to go and start the date that they are presented to, but you can also negotiate those things as well. But I would say the biggest thing with being a faculty member coming into a position, particularly a tenure track position, is that you want to negotiate your base pay and how much money you make at the beginning, because the same exact base pay you'll have until you go up for tenure. And I was not comfortable with saying that if I didn't negotiate, I would have lost at least almost close to upwards to like $10,000 to $15,000 if I did not negotiate in the beginning. That may not necessarily be true for other programs or other departments, depending on what faculty positions you're looking at. But always, always, always negotiate. Always ask for money. The biggest thing they can say no. So that's all I got.
Thank you. And I agree wholeheartedly. So I'm going to start with Quortne this time. Can you tell us if your salary negotiation approach has changed over time, say from your first career job to where you are now? What are some things that you've learned or how it's changed a little bit over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to give you context, all of my jobs up until my faculty position were all non-negotiable. Every job that I got, my career has been in higher education student affairs. So I've worked at colleges and universities for probably the last like about 10 plus years. Every single position that I've worked at from my first job post my master's degree, they all said, this is the job, this is the offer, and either you're going to take it or leave it. And so I was conditioned and socialized that throughout my career that I was just supposed to just be happy, just to have a job offer, and also just be happy with the salary they provided me. And as I kind of got older, I started realizing that as I got more jobs and I started getting more experience, that I should really start fighting for different things outside of salary. And so what I would do is I would ask for relocation costs, or I would ask for, is there any monies for me to go to conferences? Is there ways for me to present my work and my offices and departments in different ways? That was something that I thought was really important to me. And it wasn't until I became a faculty member that I was able to have a lot more agency, because I had known throughout the rest of my time that every job that I was offered, they said, well, this is the number that we're providing you. We cannot go over that number. And that's kind of, it is what it is. And that may not necessarily be the case for some of you all, depending on if you're in the business sector and you're in other sectors, but particularly in the context of education and higher education, some places may not necessarily budge with those numbers. And so you always have to find a way to kind of advocate for yourself in different ways. But that's kind of where the context of that I could share for myself.
Thank you. Gloria, how about you? Ways that your salary negotiation tactics have changed over time?
Probably just bouncing back to what I said earlier. It's when I first started, it was pretty much like, this is what the compensation is and take it or leave it. But what I tried to, build off of that was the experience I will get from it and how that's going to build my resume. So when I first started, I tried to, give them a number that I was comfortable with and comfortable if they had met me in the middle. But ultimately, I took what was the start salary or start compensation of an intern, and then just kind of tried to prosper up from there. Definitely my tactic changed by when I worked with hiring and with understanding like what our compensation bases are. I started to understand that they usually give on that lower spectrum, and there's that budge room, so you could hope for them to meet you in the middle or give you what you want. But when I first started, I was just happy to start building my resume. That might not always be the best case. Regardless, I always asked for a negotiation. I always counter offered, and I tried to be very kind with them. I'd say, hey, I was actually looking through LinkedIn. I saw some, similar companies, similar roles offering XYZ. Not all of them post on LinkedIn, but I've noticed over the last year to 2 years, more and more companies have started posting that base salary. I know if it's like a City of Chicago job, they have to put the salary out there. If it's a city job, I think every other village also has to put it. But I know City of Chicago, like they put out their pay online, or at least a range. Many companies don't, but been a trend that I've noticed that they're starting to do that. So now you see that if you know you have more experiences, more of that kind of background knowledge and whatnot, you could push to that higher part of the bracket that they provide. But it definitely never hurts to, come back with a little counter salary and just try to put your statement out. That's what I started to do when I actually was applying for full-time roles, and just, here's what I know, here's how I could help the department, here's all the experiences I have that are relevant, here are some experiences that are not relevant that I could potentially bring into the team, and just kind of show your worth. They don't really know you. They don't know what you're capable. So by giving them a list or some stories, background experiences, you're providing those opportunities for them to be like, okay, we'll give you a little bit more. But if you don't ask, then you will forever never know if they had that opportunity or that option to give you more. So it definitely changed when I started. I was just trying to build my resume, and now I'm actually trying to find that compensation for my knowledge and experience and what I'm going to do for that team.
Great, thank you. Jason, how about you? You're muted, we can't hear you.
Thank you. A lot of that I won't reiterate. I do agree with all of that, but just from a different perspective, very quickly, is, as you get involved in your career, you end up having more to bring to a potential employer, right? So keeping track, I actually keep a list of bigger emotions or cases or arguments that I win that are not often won. So then I can put that on my resume, at this law office, this is what I argued, this is what I won, right? You want to be able to, as kind of like a backing to your negotiations is, look, I'm actually worth what I'm asking, right? I think everybody, particularly after getting a graduate program, right? Everybody wants a pretty good, decent amount of money. And you know what, to be honest, in today's world, you need a lot of money in order to just make it, right? I'm gonna be honest. So, but part of that is too, is knowing your brand, knowing what you bring, especially how you represent you to prior jobs and how that trails along with you, right? For example, there are a lot of attorneys who end up graduating and they're like, automatically, I want at least $100,000. Well, I just ask everybody here, would I pay $100,000 if I didn't know you were worth it? No, I'm not. For example, an iPhone nowadays is about $1,000. If we didn't know they were worth it, people would not buy them because it's $1,000. So just being able to back up what you're asking for is important.
Jason, you actually just hit on my next question perfectly. I want to move into assessing your value and any strategic advice that you may have in regards to how to assess your own value for preparing for salary negotiations. What does that look like?
Am I first?
Yes, you can go first.
Okay. I think it's twofold. One, I think, begins on a personal, internal level, right? Being comfortable with who you are, being comfortable with knowing that you have a level of expertise that businesses want, but also being comfortable with knowing that, right, regardless of where you are in your career, you always can learn something. So I think it does begin internally with knowing that you have a value. That's hard for a lot of people to, I think, comprehend at a young age, particularly in undergrad, right? Because we are learning who we are and who we want to be. But I think the crux of a lot of business is truly being comfortable with who you are. And that begins with knowing who you are. It's a lot of nasty, hard work, difficult work. It is emotionally taxing, right? Draining, but you have to be able to know who you are in order to tell jobs, hey, look, this is what I'm worth. This is my value. If it's lower than this, I'm not taking it. During my interviews, I had jobs pretty much give me a low offer because it's a place that everybody wants to work at. You know, hey, I would love to work at an office that everybody would loathe that I work there, but listen, I also got to pay my bills, right? And I also know the value that I'm bringing. So I think the other part of that too is assessing your value is knowing your quality of work compared to others. I pride myself in writing emotions, petitions that are close to perfect. I know nothing in the world is perfect, but when I put time and energy into what I write or what I argue, often I'll have an opposing counsel or a judge, whomever, tell me, you know, this a document was well written. So just knowing too your value compared to others. I also think just lastly that it's important for people when applying for jobs to look at the office that you're applying at, one that's ranked better, right? And one that's ranked worse, to kind of have an idea of where you should land.
Thank you. So Gloria, I think you hit on this a little bit. So I would like to ask you strategic advice for communicating that value that Jason just told us how to assess, communicating that value in the recruitment process. When do you go about that?
I think it starts with believing in yourself. Like Jason said, you know, knowing your worth, but it's also believing in yourself and believing that even as an undergrad or a fresh graduate person, like you might not have those 5 corporate years of experience that they're expecting, but you have to still believe in yourself that you have what it takes to combat those daily tasks that they're going to be asking for. So when it came down, really just being able to say, I am new. I am fresh. I don't have the years of experience, but here's what I can do. I could bring a fresh perspective. I'm eager to learn. I won't, you know, necessarily know everything, but I'm here to learn and I'm here to help you guys and bring in new perspectives. For me, when I moved into the business sector of Walgreens, I knew a lot of IT background. The IT, not necessarily all of the computer science part of the IT, but I knew the way that the corporate IT works. So I knew all the leaders, I knew most of the systems, what's needed, what's going to be new, what's going to be moving on. And I was able to help my team kind of, they weren't really sure when we need to request something, where do we go? And I had all that knowledge. So even though I was a new student or a new graduate, I was able to tell them my worth of, hey, you guys don't know a lot of things that I do know. I also know a lot of more things of the newer healthcare services, telehealth and all that stuff. So I come from a different background. I'm younger, not as experienced, but I still have my worth, and believing in myself really helped. Crafting your negotiation, it starts with the tone and your belief. So if you meet with those recruiters and you show that you're scared, that you undermined your worth, that I have no experience, I'm very new, I don't know what I'm doing, that just shows that I wouldn't use the word weak, but that you're not confident in yourself. Coming up to the recruiter and saying, I know that I don't have the years of experience. I know that you might be looking for someone who has X, Y, and Z, but I am here to learn and I'm here to put in the effort to accomplish certain goals. A lot of times I tell my peers to look at job descriptions because they have all those details. They have the new systems. You could say, I started watching YouTube videos. I started playing with a certain software that you're expecting me to know. I might have only used it in class, but I have been putting in the work and I have that background. I have that new perspective. I'm putting in the work and I'm here to learn. So definitely starting off confidently. When they ask when they give you an offer and they ask, how do you feel about this offer? And they'll be like, please sign if you accept it. Simple, positive response. Hi, so-and-so. I am so happy to hear back from you with an offer. I loved my interview with the team. I think I would be a perfect fit. I have X, Y, and Z experiences. You have that email or that response that you have time to craft. Put all those experiences that support your claim. Put all of those certain softwares that put like your characteristics. If you see the team is very outgoing and extroverted, you could put it out there that either I'm an introvert and I could bring the team down to be more in line with everything, or I could very well match up to my peers. Definitely just showing that you're positive, that you know what you're worth, you believe in yourself, could craft that whole path of a negotiation rather than saying, I don't know, I'm not the best, I'm just new, what can you do? So definitely just laying out that worth in that email, or if it's in a phone call. Usually I like to tell people, and maybe others will disagree, when you're getting phone calls in, let them go to voicemail. I know that when I was getting those phone calls back from recruiters, I'd panic because I'd see the phone number location and I'd be like, oh no, is it a rejection? Is it an acceptance? Do they have more follow-up questions? I highly recommend letting it go to voicemail. You're busy. You might be in class. Like, people understand that. You might be at work. You might be out with family. You might be sleeping, or you might just be ignoring like the phone call because you're panicking and looking at it. They won't necessarily know. But that gives you time to kind of write down a note when you're going to call them back, what to say, how you want to say it, go over it, and definitely just stay calm and positive, reinforce your worth, and move forward with that. It gives a much better kind of perspective and tone to everything that you're putting out on the table. Did that answer it?
It did. Thank you. Quortne, I would like you to speak to advice for timing when you are in the salary negotiation process. If I've counter offered, and how far do I push? It's clear that I should negotiate for myself and ask for more, and there are different things that I can't ask for outside of salary, but what does that timing look like, and how far is too far, if it is such a thing as too far, when you are trying to negotiate your package?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because I think when you usually get an offer, there's this urge, or just like this sense of you having to say yes and actually agree to everything that they're providing for you. Usually what I've always done historically is when they've provided me an offer, especially if I'm in the space of applying to multiple jobs, which a lot of you all will be, you could say, thank you so much for providing me this offer. Right now, I need at least 48 to 72 hours of time to make my best decision. You don't have to share that you have other multiple offers. You don't need to share those things. That sometimes can be a little bit more tricky. It can be a little bit more dicey to do those things. But I always say to give yourself at least 2 to 3 days to really make that concrete decision, because it's a huge life change, right? Like, it's something that you're just not doing just for, one job. And even if it is one job, if it's your only offer, ask for a few days just to give yourself some time to talk it through, whether you have to talk to your mentors, talk to your folks, your parents, people, your partners, like all these different people that's part of your world. You never have to make a hasty decision. And if any job really is pushing you to make a decision at that particular time, it potentially could be a red flag that may not be the job that you really want. Or the job that it may not necessarily be the best work environment for you. So if they're already pushing you to just say yes without, this isn't like iTunes click agree all, like that. This is your life, right? Like this is something that is super important to you. And so I think definitely thinking about the timing of when they contact you. So there's times when they might contact you at the end of the day. You don't have to respond to them until the following morning. There's times where people feel like they feel pressure to do those things. And so I would say definitely take a few days and let them know that, okay, this is when I'll contact you. This is the date and the time that I will contact you. Does this work for you? But you also have agency. I think there's something that we tend to forget about when we're in the hiring process, is that we don't have any agency, because it's like, oh, I'm applying for their job. No, just as much as you're looking for them as a potential career, they're also looking for you, and you also have some agency in providing that timing as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. Gloria, I would like you to start us off on our next question. Can you talk a little bit about managing and working through imposter syndrome as part of the hiring process, the salary negotiation process?
That's a tricky one. Working through imposter syndrome. You have to definitely, I'm going to go back to the believing in yourself. Obviously, you cannot say you're a lawyer if you don't, pass the bar, and if you don't go through law school. You can't say I'm in law school and I know everything about law. When you're trying to, not to Jason take away from you, but just to broaden the perspective of, you want to work in an attorney's office. You definitely have to understand where you stand at, and you can't oversell yourself. You can't say I'm a master at Power BI, but that's because you can open and sign into Microsoft. Definitely, let's see, imposter syndrome, you have to stay grounded. I know when I worked in IT, it was really diverse. Half of my team worked from India. The other half worked from Deerfield, but were from India. There was a handful of other cultures and nationalities that worked together, but it was definitely a challenge to get everyone not only on the same time zone, but in the same kind of ballpark. People grouped off, and as an intern, I felt like I was very thrown in, and I tried to be I could code, I could do all this stuff that I couldn't do, but I felt like I had to show my worth, that I belong here. Whereas it took me probably a good half of the internship to actually acknowledge that I have questions and not to be afraid to ask those questions. I had two really good directors who are very different in character. One would constantly explain things to me versus the other one would let me come in with questions. And I think coming from someone who was constantly explaining stuff, I felt oh, he knows I don't know it, and would explain it, versus my second director who expected me to come with questions. It definitely was challenging for me. So knowing that even though I want to try my best, I won't always know the answer to everything, grounded me throughout those internships to be I don't know what you're telling me to do, or I'm not sure what the system is that you're referring to, or simply, can you repeat what you're asking me? Can you write it down? Can you show me a diagram? My main way to probably go around the imposter syndrome would be grounding yourself and taking that time to just work with everyone around you and not be afraid to ask those questions. Because I definitely know I was afraid, which then held me back, because when I was trying to Google everything and trying to figure it out on the go, even though I had tight deadlines. Now when my boss will ask me something from Power BI that's more complicated, I'm allowed to go to Google. I'm allowed to spend those 20 minutes and try to figure it out. But as an intern, if I didn't know something, I wasn't expected to know everything. So staying grounded and being confident in yourself, admit to what you don't know, would be one way. Maybe if I think about it, I could come up with some more examples, but definitely just staying grounded and believing in yourself. Because I know I hurt myself by just trying to absorb it and be yeah, I'll get this to you. And then I sat in my little corner and I was just what am I supposed to tackle? But being able to reach out to people and ask those questions definitely helps. Grounding yourself.
Thank you. Quortne, how about you? What would be your advice on combating and working through imposter syndrome during the hiring process, the salary negotiation process?
Yeah, I think some of the things can be really challenging, because when we think about salary negotiation, it's usually up to somebody else. And it's somebody else at multiple times looking at you and all the identities that you hold as a way to put a value to a number of how much money you're making. So that's one way of people looking at salary, right? But I think for me, in terms of imposter syndrome, I tend to think about being who I am is what got me here, right? Like why should I try to be somebody else, right? Like why would I try to emulate someone else that doesn't look like me, that doesn't show up like me? And so think about the ways that you can show your authentic self in a way that also is very much grounded in like your safety and all of those kind of things, right? I think in a lot of ways, imposter syndrome seeps through in everything because there's a lot of times I think for myself as someone who is Black, very like Black, queer, all these other pieces, the world is telling me that I don't deserve to be in these spaces. I don't deserve to show up in these spaces. However, I know that every single day that I live my world, I'm disrupting those norms. And so I think about the ways that I can show up in not only in your job and your career, but ways to know that, I am here and we're recording, but I'm like, excuse my French, like, I'm the shit, right? And not necessarily as a way that it's supposed to be really cocky or, that kind of thing, but a sense of confidence in yourself and knowing that you have all the things that you need to do to be successful. All you're doing at a salary negotiating spaces is sharing that, like, this is what I'm going to share. And this is what I'm going to, bring to the table, and making sure that they also, come correct. And so that's all I can give.
Thanks, Quortne. Jason, how about you? What advice do you have?
For imposter syndrome, this was a little harder for me. I've been thinking this entire time. I think I agree with Quortne the most when it comes to, and I think it reflects back to, I think it was my last answer of really being comfortable with who you are. Because, for example, in my world, I think there's a lot of people think that there's one way to be a lawyer, right? That everybody just has to yell and be aggressive and just keep yelling. And if they don't hear you, yell louder. I can do that, but I don't do it right away. I have learned to be comfortable with being able to be amicable at the beginning and try to work things out. I truly believe, especially in my area of law where you're dealing with, some of the hardest times of a person's life, right? Getting a divorce, or maybe the case includes child neglect, child abuse, domestic violence, right? It can get very, very complex. I find that my approach is different than others, and I'm going to come at the other party, kind of like what Quortne just mentioned, to come correct. I'm going to come at you from a reasonable position, and say, look, this is how it's likely going to work out. Let's enter into an agreement, right? It's better for both the parents. It's better for the children. But if not, at the same time, I can yell and take it the other route. So that is different in my practice, being able to be amicable. I do think there's a push for lawyers to be more negotiating and amicable. That's probably not what you see on TV, but I do think the crux of that, though, is me being comfortable with who I am, comfortable with my approach to how I practice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So we're going to transition into the Q&A, and we actually have our first set of questions from a student, but I want to let my students know, feel free to drop any questions that you may have in the chat. You can send it directly to me, send it to the group. We'll try and get as many as we can answered. And we have about 14 minutes left in the session. So we have a student wondering what language they should use in salary negotiation. Specifically, how do you create a solid defense for a pay increase, and how do you know how much you should be asking for? So any of the panelists can take it.
My first question is, what do you mean by what language, whoever that is? What language should you use? What does that mean?
This is what
I'm essentially just wondering like, how do you go about starting a conversation like that? Like, how do you phrase questions and phrase your defense? And it's just, it's kind of a confrontational thing to do in a professional setting. And how do you do that professionally?
Was always taught, and maybe the other panelists were taught differently, but I was always taught to, unless the panelist or the interviewer tells you what the income is during your initial interview, to not ask. I kind of think it begins with your personal knowledge of what's going on around you. So, for example, there are professors everywhere, there are IT people everywhere, there are lawyers everywhere, but even though you're applying to one office or a couple offices, like I mentioned earlier, you should look at what other offices are also offering, right? If you look at brand new lawyers, it's anywhere between 60K and 180K right out of law school. That range is huge, right? So then it kind of took me to be able to look at, well, that range is huge. So this is the area of law that I want to practice. So now let me look into what law offices, small to large, are offering when it comes to income. And I do think the salary is tough. For example, those conversations are hard. I do think, though, it begins as well with you looking into each office. For example, how many people do they have there? How many clients do they have there? What kind of people do they represent? I know it's different because I'm coming at this as an attorney, but if it's a bigger office, of course, they're going to pay more. If it's Walgreens, I would presume they're going to pay more than like your local place that gives out medicine. I don't know what to call it. So I think it begins with your knowledge of it. And number two, I think it goes back to what Quortne mentioned, is it's being okay with being authentic and really being comfortable with knowing, hey, I am the shit. Because there are offices out there who will give you an initial low offer. My offers range from 60K to 100.
Thank you, Jason. Gloria, Quortne, any advice on the kind of language that should be used in the negotiation, or how to create that solid defense for a pay increase?
Most recruiters probably are expecting you to come back with a counter, so you're not gonna shock them, they're not gonna panic. But there's definitely, when I was doing it, a ton of prompts on Google that you could kind of find that match your tone. Like I said, definitely stay positive but grounded. So, be thankful that you got the offer. So, I would be super excited to be on this team. However, when I was, comparing salary ranges of similar roles, either within the company or within different companies, I noticed that, the compensation was higher, and I would like to ask for, and then put out an amount, put out what you're expecting. And what I usually do, or tell people to do, is add a few more dollars to that. Like, it won't hurt you. Recently, my fiance was getting a promotion, and I told him, like, argue it. And he's like, I was going to, and I told him argue it like $2,000 more. And his boss came back with $1,000, and he's like, well, it's $1,000. And I'm like, well, that's closer to you getting your triathlon bike. Like, yeah, maybe you were comfortable with that, but it didn't hurt you to ask for the extra. It didn't hurt you, and it only came back in your favor. For example, when I asked, sometimes I got declined, but at least you make that effort. You'll never know if you don't, but there's plenty of like prompts out there that are customized to both, IT or business or healthcare, like medical school. If you're like, type in salary negotiation response and like whatever field you're in, and there's tons of prompts that if you want to use, you can't come up with your own verbiage, like go out there and browse through the web. There's so many, but definitely make sure to keep that tone positive but grounded. You don't want to come off snobby, which unless you use some vulgar words, you won't. They know that you're coming back and they know that you have worth, and they'll be expecting you to negotiate. And if they're capped out, they'll let you know kindly. That's
Thank
about
you.
it. Yeah, be positive.
Thanks, Gloria. Quortne?
Yeah, really quick. So some things I was actually just looking up my email that I sent to my department chair before I when I negotiated my salary. So I use different words, particularly around like just kind of just, you know, framing of thank you for sharing this information regarding my offer. I would say, you know, kind of sharing a little bit what, you know, some of the other panelists have shared around like, you know, you're excited about accepting this position, but you would like to inquire about some modifications or some, you know, to your offer letter before you can formally accept. You want to use certain languages, things like that, to let them know that these are things that you're really excited about the position, but you want to accept it, but there's some changes or some, you know, things that you want to kind of go through. You know, you can also talk about things around like, you know, you're open to bridging your salary negotiation if it's not possible through other alternative means in terms of, you know, relocation costs or professional development or, you know, startup funds. You know, if you're working remotely, you need to negotiate things around like having a desk or having monitors, you know, other office equipment, other things like that. You know, I think using some of those type of language and those kind of pieces it would be helpful. But I would also say don't be afraid to, you know, share this with people that you're really close to. So maybe your guardians or parents or community members or your mentors. There's a people that are around you that have been doing a lot of salary negotiations for many years, and they also have good language too. And so what I did was actually sent this to my mentor and was like, hey, does this make sense before even hitting send? Sometimes we feel so urgent to send it quickly because they're asking us for an answer, but you can also take some time to look it over and have a review before sending it out.
Thanks, Quortne.
There's also possibility if they say like this role is capped out, like this is the salary, like they'll have bracketed salaries for different levels, like analyst, manager, senior manager, like there's brackets that cap out. There's also the possibility of asking for like a hiring bonus. So just a sign-on bonus that you get a lump sum, whether that's going to cover monitors, computers, whatever, or simply they say we don't have a departmental budget, but maybe HR has that sign-on bonus budget that they could factor in to your offer. It's always worth to ask.
Yes, I agree. It is always worth to ask. Quortne hit on it a little bit. I think tapping into your network where appropriate. So for example, I was in a very similar role at a different university before I came to Loyola, and pretty much the exact same role. My director at the time at that other university used to be the director of this career center. So I was able to go back to her when I was preparing for this job and say, hey, are they looking for anything different than what I do right now? Like, you used to run that office. Tell me what you know. You hired most of these people. You hired the people that I'm going to interview for. Tell me what you know. So if you have, you know, use your network, use your contacts that you have as much as you and they are comfortable in helping you in this process. I think that's very important. Do we have any other questions from any students? We have about 5 minutes left. Do we have anything else that anybody wants to know? You can drop it in the chat or just unmute yourself. Okay, if not, I would like to thank all of the students for being here. I would like to thank our panelists so very much for being here with us tonight. I would like to remind the students that we are having the virtual DEI fair on Wednesday, February 23rd from 3 to 6 p.m. So if you haven't had a chance to register, please go to Handshake and check out who's coming and feel free to register. We would love to have you. Unless anybody has anything else, thank you all so much for attending. I appreciate it. All right.